Before we jump into today's episode, I want to tell you about something new and something cool that we just made for you. I wrote it myself. Now, here's my assumption. If you are listening to this podcast, it probably means that you want to build long-term wealth with a rental real estate portfolio, and you would probably like to do it with some creative financing. And as I talk to people who want to do that, I know a lot of questions come up, and I thought there's really no great single resource that really captures the entire picture of how that works. But I have solved that problem because I have written a new PDF that is just for you, and it's called the Step-by-Step Guide to Buying Your First or Next Rental Property Without Relying on a Lender to Approve You for a Loan. Like I said, I wrote this thing myself, and if I do say so myself, it's pretty thorough. And in this, you're going to learn a few things. I'm going to teach you about the 3 key strategies to find and negotiate quality off-market real estate deals that nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm going to teach you about what I call the yeses framework for getting off-market sellers to accept your offers. And then I'm also going to teach you the 11 simple steps that you need to take to get your first or your next deal accepted without needing to go to a bank and apply for a loan and just hope that they give it to you. So if you would like to get this free downloadable PDF, just go to rentalwealthguide.com and you can download it right now. rentalwealthguide.com and get your download of the step-by-step guide to buying your first or next rental property without relying on a lender to approve you for a loan. Now, on with the show. Sometimes the very best way to learn something new is to eavesdrop on somebody else's coaching session. And that's what we're going to be doing today. I recently conducted a live coaching session with an aspiring young investor. Now, she is interested in buying her first duplex. It's off market, of course, and she wants to buy it with seller financing. And this seller's scenario is really, really unique. And so she and I got on the call together, and I provided live coaching to her on the steps that she could take to make headway in her pursuit of acquiring this piece of property with seller financing. And I want you to learn as much from her situation as she's learning from it and how we're tackling it. Let's cue up the theme song and let's dive right in.
Successful real estate investing isn't all about we buy houses and motivated sellers. That's the lowbrow approach, and it gives real estate investing a slimy reputation. Gross. There is a better way, a more genuine, human approach. We are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, and this is sleaze-free real estate investing.
This is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. Welcome to episode number 31 of Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. This is a show for those of us who have never felt at home in the We Buy Houses crowd. In this show, we take a stand against what we call the lowbrow approach, the mainstream guru seminar distressed seller approach that ends up giving real estate investors a slimy reputation. And instead, we discuss the strategies, the tactics, and the philosophies that we call the thoughtful way, an enlightened approach to real estate entrepreneurship that focuses on constantly sharpening the sophisticated real estate entrepreneur's 3 most critical capabilities: seller relation skills, deal architecture skills, and opportunity vision. When all 3 of these capabilities are successfully in motion, you can make an excellent living today and build long-term wealth while creating value for everybody that you touch along the way. Show notes for today's episode are at thoughtfulre.com/E31. Please do yourself a big favor. It also does us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app right now before you keep listening. Thank you so much. Now, I recently connected with Abby, and Abby reached out to me, and she had a couple questions about an opportunity that she came across that she was excited about. And as she and I were exchanging messages on Facebook Messenger, I had a realization that, 2 realizations really, that one, it would be more effective for me to explain my thoughts about her investment strategy in this deal and her pursuit of the seller relations side of this verbally rather than in writing. And secondly, that so many people could probably learn from hearing this exchange. And so I asked Abby if she would be willing to have the conversation verbally and record it, and then let everybody else who listens to the podcast hear it as well. And she was really gracious to be comfortable doing that. And so we jumped on Zoom recently and recorded ourselves a live coaching session, which I now want to share with you. Let's jump right into the coaching session interview, and I hope you pick up a lot of great tips about how to pursue off-market deals, develop seller relations, especially in very unique situations, and ultimately build towards an opportunity to buy a piece of real estate with seller financing. Well, thank you for being here and talking through this opportunity with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So give us a big picture. Like, what are we talking about? How did you stumble upon this particular opportunity, et cetera?
Yeah, I actually stumbled upon it a few months ago. I was just driving by and I saw a for sale by owner sign in front of this house. It turns out it's a duplex. So I reached out to them. He sent me, his name is John. He emailed me over an information sheet just with some basic facts about it. The year is built, things like that, and the asking price, which was $285,000. At the time, I was not confident enough to really do anything with that information, and so I kind of let it go. And then just last week, I was walking my dog by that same property because I live close by now, and I saw the sign out again. And I live in a pretty hot market, and so it just kind of stuck out to me that it was still there. So I reached out to him again, and he sent me the same information sheet, but the price had been reduced from $285,000 to $265,000. So that immediately stuck out to me. So so I sent him a text and wanted to see the property and everything. But that's just kind of how I found it initially.
Yeah. Well, so first, I just want to say I think there's very good, having your radar up about the idea that if we're in a hot market and there's this property that's sitting there and it continues to sit there, and then now it's being offered for less and it's for sale by owner. I love for sale by owner, situations, but it always does make me wonder, if you want to just hit the easy button, you just call a realtor, And so for some reason they intentionally didn't do that. And sometimes there are lots of different reasons why people do, make that choice. Sometimes it's a matter of principle. They're like, well, I don't like to pay somebody else to do something I can do. Sometimes they think they're going to save money. And sometimes it's just it's how they've done everything else in their life and they don't want to change now. So yeah, good job tuning into that. Okay. So you reach out to John and then what happens? Have you been through the place yet?
Yeah. So I went over there, walked through with him. He had, a mask and gloves on and everything. And so and the upstairs was beautiful. Just the floor had been redone and everything. And then the downstairs needed quite a bit of work, new toilet, things like that, new carpet, single pane windows. And looked at the shed kind of garage thing outside that also needed some work, if not just to be torn out completely. And then he and I discussed it a little bit. The owner actually lives, so she's baptized her 20 years ago. And so they've just been in contact. So she's owned the property for that long, and she lived in it for 2 years when she lived back there in the late 90s. And he's just been taking care of it for her. And so, so been doing that. And I was just able to, build up a little bit of a relationship with him, not much, but it's just kind of a funny situation with her living in a different country. So,
yeah, super unique. And, our approach overall is that we're we tend to play the person more than playing the property. And so it's really interesting that, you're getting all this face-to-face, mask to mask type of opportunity with this person, but he's not actually the owner. Right. But so for all 20 years or so, then has he been managing this place the whole time?
Yeah, no. So, for the most part, they did have a management company taking care of it for a few years and renting it out. They stopped doing that a few years ago. I think she was just kind of sick of the hassle of it. And so John has been the one doing some fix ups and everything, but he's quite elderly. And so I'm just imagining him doing these repairs. And I guess that she's also told him, like, no, you can't do any more repairs. And that's part of the reason she wants to sell too, is because she doesn't want John to take any more of the responsibility for it.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of funny like that. But
yeah. So it's safe to say John knows this place infinitely better than the seller herself, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. And when, just to step back for a second, when you first saw it, like what was the thing that kind of grabbed you about it? I mean, what were you thinking originally? What are you even thinking now? Are you thinking this is a place I might want to live in? House hacking, like live in one unit, rent out the other one, rent them both, flip it. Like, what are your different thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not as familiar with all of the different methods yet. And so, but initially what I'm thinking as a beginner, I'm pretty content with the place I'm living at right now. And so I was just thinking of possibly renting out both units, possibly fixing up the bottom unit a little bit, just, to where it's a little more rentable than it is now, and just doing it that way. So yeah, it's not something I'd really plan on living in myself necessarily.
Okay. And so let's talk about the units. What's like the bedroom bathroom configuration in the two units?
Yeah. So there's one bathroom downstairs with no bathtub, but one bedroom. And then in the upstairs unit, it's 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, bathtub included.
Okay. So you have a 2-1 upstairs and a 1-1 downstairs.
Right.
And upstairs is occupied?
Neither of them are occupied right now. When I had reached out a few months ago, the bottom one was occupied until April, but now neither of them are occupied. So, and they don't plan on renting either of them out until it's sold again. So it's not something she really wants to deal with anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. So what does in your market, which by the way, do you mind telling us kind of like where you are in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in northern Logan, Utah. So it's pretty small, but yeah, definitely a pretty hot market. So.
Okay. And what would you say roughly like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit kind of average decent condition rents for?
To be honest, I am not even all that familiar with it. A lot of this, I'm just still kind of getting to know the ropes a little bit. From what John has told me, she's actually asking way too much, even with the $20,000 price drop. Mm-hmm. And that was, information to me. And so that's something that was funny because he's like, I think she's asking too much. They had actually tried to sell it with a realtor, which is why they originally took the for sale by owner sign down back in January or so. And then this realtor, who is a friend of theirs, said, she's asking too much. I'm not going to be able to list it. Someone put in an offer for, I believe it was $225,000. And then this realtor friend said, no, that's not enough. And so John, I think, was kind of telling me like, okay, like he was telling me those parameters of this is too much, but this is too little. So whatever you can offer somewhere around there. So he wasn't telling me an exact number, but I think he was just kind of, hinting, if you can get somewhere kind of between here, then you might be in the ballpark. So. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're thinking of this mostly as just an investment for yourself. Mm-hmm. It'd be great to buy it, be able to rent it out.
Right.
But so are you 2-bedroom, 1-bath units for rent right now? Do you have any idea of what the average kind of a ballpark price is for those? Are you renting yourself right now?
I am renting. Yes, it's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath. But so I would guess the 2-bedroom, 1-bath would be around $900 a month.
Okay. And how about the one bedroom?
1 bedroom, maybe $700, $750, depending on if utilities are included or not.
Okay. All right, great. I'm just going to put on my notes like 725. And so those are great initial ballpark. So, there's a lot of things that kind of have to happen like concurrently here. I sort of see it as there's a whole lot of different topics and you're kind of like just dipping your finger in one topic and poking this topic and just sort of like gauging a lot of different things here. So one would be, like, what is the level of demand for rental units of 2 bedrooms and 1 bath? And so when you said it's a hot market before, did you mean on a sales level it's a hot market, or is the rental market hot too? Do you think? What's your, was it hard for you to find the place you're living in right now, for instance?
So the place I'm living in right now, I actually, I knew the landlord previously, and so it wasn't as difficult for me to find. So I can't say necessarily if it is or isn't a hot rental market. Sales wise, it's definitely a hot market. I can't say as much maybe in the last couple of months with everything going on, but definitely previously to that, it's been very, very hot. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, back to my comment about we're gauging a lot of different things at the same time. I think there's 2 things broadly, or 2 categories that are sort of happening simultaneously. One is you are kind of having a vision for what this opportunity might look like for you, take shape in your mind, right? And you're thinking, okay, well, I can see myself owning this and renting it out and that, this and that. And then there's the other total different simultaneous process that ultimately has to intersect with the first one, but is, who are we dealing with here? What is their situation, their motivation? And we're like detectives when it comes to talking to other people. We're like, what are their attitudes about different things? And so one thing we can already see is that John and the seller have slightly different attitudes about things. John's is certainly more informed, right? Because he's a boots on the ground right there, seeing things, and he can see the condition of the place and everything. Mm-hmm. So we had the kind of 2 simultaneous processes that we're kind of going through. So to talk about the first one, I would suggest that you do some research to firm up these ideas of $900 and $725 or $7 to $750 for the 2 units. And so, I'd go on Craigslist, I'd get on Hot Pads or whatever online and kind of do some rental comp research to see if that feels accurate. Another thing you can do is you could even post an ad on Craigslist as if you had a place for rent and sort of generally loosely describe it as this place, and just see if you get responses. I mean, that's it's just sort of like putting a line in the water and seeing if you get any bites on the end, on the end of the hook kind of. But it'd be really good to be able to firm that sense up, because at that point you could then start doing like a little bit of a spreadsheet type analysis just to say, well, okay, if I was getting $900 and $725, I can look up the property taxes. That's public record. I can make a couple calls about insurance and probably get a reasonable estimate of that. I can, figure out what the utilities costs would be roughly, and then start to get a sense for, on a monthly basis, what would this property look like in terms of cash flow, right? So you say, well, looks like $1,625 or so is coming in each month. We've got these expenses. And at the end of the month, there's X dollars. Let's say there's $900 left that could be used to pay for debt and for cash flow for you, right? So after these expenses, there's that much money left. That's the amount we would have to work with to provide some return to ourselves and to maybe pay for a loan. Mm-hmm. And I like to think of these things as, you don't have to paint the most perfect, most precise picture right off the bat. Paint a rough picture, and then we're going to go back through, and then we're going to kind of fine tune it. It's going to get a little clearer. And then we're going to go back through, and we're going to make it clearer and clearer. And by the time you were to close on something like this, you would know without a doubt exactly what all of these things are. But the first pass is kind of trying to say, is this thing in the general strike zone of being even doable in any sense? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, would be kind of rental comps. And then another idea just simply would also be sales comps. I mean, John is of the opinion that this place is overpriced. The market seems to have kind of spoken on that point a little bit too. So you kind of have some like bookends, I would say, because there's a realtor has said, no, 225 is too low. So that's kind of like one bookend. Right. And you got 285. Nobody wanted it at 285. Right. Now it's 265. That seems a little shaky too. So you kind of have like bookends, and it's, you're probably looking at like the market value is probably somewhere in between those 2 bookends. But through some research, maybe talking to a realtor, if you can query the sort of local database of other duplexes or find some comps yourself, you could kind of hone in on that a little bit and start to see, well, there was one down the street that sold that's very similar, but frankly is a little bit nicer, and it sold at 235. I'm just sort of making that up, obviously, but
right.
If you get more data points, it will help you start to hone in on what is sort of an actual value of that. And not that we're just going to go offer what the actual value is, but we're just collecting as much information as we possibly can on all these different topics right now.
Right. Perfect.
So back to kind of a little bit like where the property and the people merge. Do you know how long? It sounds like the downstairs one has been vacant, not too long, right? Just a couple weeks?
Right. Yeah, not too long. It has to have been just a couple of weeks.
Okay. And do you know how long the top one has been vacant?
That one was vacant when I reached out back in January. So that's been vacant for quite a few months now.
Okay. So it's interesting to just try to extrapolate some little insights from those data points, right? Clearly, they're not that urgent about squeezing every dollar on a cash flow basis out of this thing, right?
Right.
Because they would have re-rented it before. And you could probably talk with John and just ask him a couple well-placed questions just to kind of confirm that assumption. You might ask him something like, gosh, it's been 3 or 4 months now. How come you haven't re-rented the one on top? And just sort of see if he kind of confirms like, well, it's just not that important. She's ready to just kind of move on at this point.
Right. And I did reach out to him a couple of days ago, and I asked him, like, when is she hoping to sell? And he's like, well, it's been on she's been trying to sell for a few months now. So kind of just any time. So it sounded pretty loose. So I know that she wants to sell it, obviously, but it doesn't seem like it's something that's incredibly urgent, has to happen right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's talk more about some of the people. Like, so when you see John, like paint a picture of John. Like, how is he dressed? What kind of car did he show up in?
Yeah, he showed up in a truck, and he was in just a button-up shirt and jeans, and just rubber gloves, mask, the whole thing with a baseball hat on.
Okay.
He was really warm. I mean, there was just that initial getting to know you kind of thing, but no, he was really nice to talk to. We really were able to connect on a couple of things, but that was just my initial impression of him for seeing him.
Do you know how far away he lives?
I don't know how far away he lives.
Yeah. Just curious because, if he's responsible for this thing, he lives 20 miles away. That could be a real pain to be going back and forth all the time. So it's just, I feel like there's, my favorite word, it's probably a word that people don't understand as well as I think they do. But my favorite word with this game is like nuance. I feel like every situation, every person is so incredibly nuanced. And I want to take measurements of 1,000 different things about these people. So I kind of want to know, like, does John look kind of middle class? Does he look more upper class? Like, how old was his truck, for instance?
His truck was relatively new. It was probably like 2013, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, what was your other question about? You said upper class, lower class?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, probably upper middle class, I would say. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you know anything else about like John himself, or what else he does, or what he did for work, or anything like that?
I didn't do the best job at asking those questions. I was going through your course afterwards, and I was like, oh my gosh, I should have asked all these great questions and, got to know him a little bit better. But no, I definitely missed out on that opportunity, but I'm trying to slowly reconcile that over text. So.
Yeah. Well, and that actually brings up an important point about the approach that I teach, is that we don't have to get in there and like make a deal today. These are slower development of relationship types of things. And so I think the more FaceTime that you can get with John also, like, there becomes a point at which he's going to be like, I don't want to just meet up just to like shoot the breeze necessarily. But if you can come up with a good reason to see him again, or just something that kind of makes sense rationally, but then you know that really your main goal isn't to like look at the roof. It's actually to talk to him and get to know him a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what sort of things would you suggest for me to open that sort of a meeting? Like as far as, like should I ask, like about the roof or maybe about the basement again? Say, hey, like to take another look at the basement. Would you mind meeting me again? Is there anything specifically that you would, suggest in that regard?
Well, I think there will be lots of things as you progress through the conversation. There'll be lots of reasons to get back face to face, especially at the property. But I would actually, it's so interesting. Like normally I would be aiming all these thoughts at the seller, but the seller is sort of the secondary person, oddly enough here. So I like to get face to face whenever I can, because face to face is like seeing a picture in 4K HD. Being on the phone is like, it's like a black and white image. Text is like Morse code. You're not going to get anything out of somebody's like tone or environment or anything like that. So I always shoot for the hierarchy of communications. And one of the things I actually say, and in my case, this is actually true, but even if it wasn't necessarily true for you, this is actually, I think, a good way to frame it. You can say, I hope you don't mind. I'm kind of an old fashioned person. I just like to see people face to face. Would it be okay if I've written out a few questions. I'm finishing a couple more things I want to run by you. Would it be okay if I came over and just, I'd like to make it convenient for you. I'd be happy just to come over to your place and sit there and chat with you for a minute. Because once you show up, like just think about how much more you're going to know about John, for instance, when you pull up to his house and you go in his living room and you see what's on his wall and you see if it's a 30-year-old couch you're sitting on or not, and you see that he's got a Rolls Royce in the driveway, and you're going to know a lot more about him. And you'll find lots of things probably to connect on from a rapport standpoint, right? He might some sports team memorabilia, and you're like, oh, I love that team, or that musician, or whatever it might be. There's so many more, infinitely more ways to connect with people. Right. You see them in their in the native habitat, so to speak. Yeah. So I would try to find a reasonable excuse for that. And I think if you just said, I've been brainstorming, I've got a few questions. I'd love, is he married? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, he is married. Again, I didn't do the best job at extracting information about him when I was there, but in the email he sent me, his little icon image was of him and his wife, and he mentioned her briefly when we were together. So
okay. And are you married?
No, I'm not. I'm single. Single as a Pringle.
Okay. Well, so the reason I ask is sometimes other people who are older than you see you as younger versions of themselves, right? And so if you happen to be married or something like that, there's definitely sort of this way of equating the two of you to being like the two of them are, but 40 years ago or whatever. Right. And that can be really good for developing great rapport. And because ultimately, this is a complicated situation in the sense that you kind of need to get John to fall in love with you so that he can sell you to the seller, right? Because he needs to be able to call her and say, I think this is the right person. She's at the right point in her life. Sure would be nice to see her be able to get into this place. She wants to buy her first home or whatever the case is. But if you can, just connect the dots between your life and their life in any way, or, based on the age difference, maybe they would see you kind of like a granddaughter, for instance. And so things that you can do to help that are great. Because people like to help other people that they like,
Definitely.
When I think about like how to articulate what it is I'm trying to teach people and who I'm trying to teach it to, the word that keeps coming up in my mind is likable. Like I can't teach people to be likable. But if you are likable, I can teach you some of these techniques and skills for sort of translating the likability into getting deals done. And I think you have that likability. So it's like, how do you just use that naturally without even trying too hard, but to connect with them? And I'd say if you were able to meet his wife also, if she starts to really like you too, that's a great thing as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, he and I, something that we were able to connect on when we met was, when he told me the story about how he baptized the owner 18 years ago, I was like, oh, I recently actually just got back into religion because of XYZ, and and it's the same religion. And so we were able to chat a little bit about that. But no, yeah. And so that was really cool. And that's what I think is really cool about that too, is that that's a genuine connection. It's like learning about this. It doesn't, I think some people would be like, oh, well, you're, using trickery or whatever and using these techniques so that you can get something out of them. But to me, I see it as actual, genuine, real connections. And so that's something that I thought was really cool about us meeting, and a part that I, actually did somewhat of a good job on by getting that information from him.
Yeah.
But so I just like what you said about that. But
yeah, absolutely. And I can see how some people would say that, but what depends is how you do it. And if you do it with genuineness and authenticity and sincerity, that's what really matters. The other thing I was going to say that also could be an angle for spending more time with John too would be, and this too is also very honest. Like, you would be kind of becoming a first-time landlord, and he's got literally decades of experience managing this property.
Yeah.
And so you could say, like, I'm super excited to do this, but I definitely, like, there's a couple things I wonder about, like how to be a good landlord. If I include a couple of those things in my list of questions to run by you, would you mind sharing your experience with me? Because people like to give other people advice and mentor them. And that you could get a lot out of that from just learning what he actually has to say about that topic. But also you would just get to know him better, and I'm sure you'd gain more insight into the property and the seller as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the seller then. So do you know, like, what took her to Taiwan? I mean, that's not, just sort of wake up one day and be like, I think I'm going to move to Taiwan.
Right. Well, she was actually here for university. And so she moved here, bought the home, got married, and lived in the home for 2 years before moving back. Okay. Now her main motivation of selling is, from John's words, her kids just got accepted into very expensive schools. So that's why she needs that income. But so that's why she moved back, is because that's actually where she's from. So.
Okay. All right. This is going to seem like I'm bouncing around, and I guess I am a little bit, but
please.
Do you have any idea what they rented the units for last time?
I don't know. I actually reached out to John about that, and he didn't get back to me. And so I reached out to him over email and said, hey, I don't know if this is a better way for you to correspond, but I took a really good line from you after the mortgage and taxes are paid, how much is left over each month, to give me an idea, both of if there's still an existing mortgage, which I don't believe there is, but I just want to double check, and what those rents are. But at this point, I haven't gotten any solid answers. So I'm still trying to figure that part out.
Yeah. So we're always trying to figure out, that sounds like a mathematical data point, and it is, but it's also an insight about them and how they think, and what their sort of in tuneness with the market is. For instance, one thing that's, like, from your perspective as a buyer, really, really great to hear is if John or the seller were to say, we were renting the top unit for $500 before, but I really think the market is like $650. But the market is $900. And so those are all really interesting data points that are useful in different ways. So first of all, you learn so much from that. So if they were renting it at $600 before, that means you can infer from that they're not really that worried about squeezing every dollar of cash flow out. It also shows that they're not super in tune with the market. It probably might even show that they might have a soft spot for their tenants. Like if you had asked, like, well, how long was that person there? If they say, well, they were there for 15 years, like, that tells you a lot about they're being probably pretty loose on management. They're probably very heart-centered, didn't really have the heart to raise the rents, but they also probably didn't really know what the market was. Right. So then that second data point is if they say, oh, I think the market's, whatever, 675 or something like that. Mm-hmm. That too tells you a lot about their perspective, their level of knowledge, their level of, kind of professionalism in the business of being a landlord. Mm-hmm. But it also is yet another great thing from your perspective, because we'll talk about seller financing in a minute, because I know that's something that's on your mind. But if you know that the market rent is at like $900, that creates a lot more margin for you to work with, that you could actually pay. You could make loan payments to them that might even net them more money than they were getting from the renters, because you actually know what the market would bear in terms of that unit.
Right.
I did that one time. I bought a place from a guy who was, I mean, it was crazy what he was renting it for, like $750, and I knew the market was like at least $1,500. And so by simply getting the rents where they were supposed to, my mortgage payment to him each month was more than he ever collected from his tenants. So that made my proposition to him like really a no-brainer.
Yeah.
He said, of course I would do that, So again, all these really, really interesting things that we learn about people when you hear some of those numbers. It's not just about the spreadsheet. It's actually about learning, like the kind of person who keeps a $900 unit at $600 and doesn't even realize it is very different than the kind of person who keeps it at $875 when they think it should be $900. That's just a very different person.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the seller herself, do you know, are her kids going to school in Taiwan, or are they coming back stateside, or do you know like where they're going to school or anything?
I don't know. Again, I didn't do the best job the report of things. I don't know what schools they're going to.
Okay. Yeah. Just curious, I mean, if I don't know anything about Taiwanese schools, but it's just more interesting, like data points,
Yeah.
About the person. Okay. So let's talk about another big element, of course, is starting to move towards the seller financing conversation. So I know from our previous exchanges, that's something that's, on your mind, it intrigues you. Tell us why is that something that you would like to explore?
Yeah, well, at this point, I just went through a really pretty large life transition and don't have a lot of, money to just put down in a property. I don't believe I can qualify for a traditional bank loan to purchase a property. And so that's why I'm interested in, doing something seller financing so I can get into it with as little money down as possible and then be able to build that wealth from there. And then from that point, be able to, have more options as to how I'm investing in real estate.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I love it. And seller financing is like an umbrella that encapsulates several other things kind of within it. It's kind of a broad term, but all of those things more or less would accomplish what you just described. Mm-hmm. So let's talk through then some of the ways to kind of feel out the possibilities of seller financing. So the general myth about seller financing is that, that's something a seller only does when it's like a last resort. When they can't sell the property in any other way, well, then they have to give up and, provide the financing themselves to kind of grease the wheels for a buyer. And I'm sure there are lots of cases where that is true, but that is certainly like a way limiting way of looking at it. Because I've bought properties many times from people who they insisted that we do seller financing because they had their own reasons why. Okay. And so one of the things we need to be doing is, feeling around for some of the indicators and the signals that make seller financing like a possibility, or not just a possibility, but something that could be proposed to the seller in a way that would really align well with their own goals.
Right.
So one of those things is capital gains tax issues. So, your seller has owned this place for 22 years?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Right. So that's a long time. A person incurs a lot of capital gains over the course of 22 years in most circumstances. Mm-hmm. So that is very, and she hasn't lived in it in a long time, right? So she's not going to get an exemption on that. So that means when she sells the property, one way or the other, that will have to be dealt with. A lot of people will do a 1031 exchange in order to defer their capital gains. But I don't know, something tells me about this person living, on the other side of the world that might not be her plan. So have you have you got any sense or any read at all from them yet about her attitude or feelings, concerns, strategies around capital gains at all?
Not yet. Like I said, I've been trying to kind of reach out to John about a couple of these things, and he's been not the most responsive. Same with my grandpa, so just text message doesn't seem to work well with him. But so yeah, I'm trying to see if I can figure something out. I reached out to him to ask if I could possibly get in touch with the owner directly, or, I really like what you said about trying to meet with John again in person. So yeah, I'm trying to put together that list of things to ask him, but
okay. All right. That's cool. Yeah. And I think, at this point you probably could reach out to John. And if you think of it generationally, also, I would just say generationally, the phone is probably a better medium, than text, right? That's a big generalization, I know, but,
right.
But if you were to call him on the phone and just say, hey, you know what? I just realized I'm going to be just blowing your phone up here. I've got a lot of questions. I'm super excited. Would it be okay if I met up with you sometime? I'd be happy just to come to your place and make it easy for you. But I've got a whole bunch of questions. If you wouldn't mind tutoring a beginner a little bit, or something like that, that plays, it plays into maybe some of his motivations to sell the place, but also to help out a young investor.
Right. Definitely. Awesome. Yeah. That seems like a great idea.
So it'd be great to know about her feelings about capital gains. Sometimes people don't even realize it, right? Especially, gosh, if you've been living in another country, you might be really disconnected from kind of like local laws, and maybe, who knows, maybe she doesn't even file taxes in the US. I don't really know how that works.
Right.
Cases, she could be disconnected from the topic, is my point. And that in and itself is an interesting insight.
Yeah.
Another thing that tends to trigger an opportunity to propose seller financing is when somebody says, I just don't really know what exactly I'm going to do with the money, or I know I need a return on my investment, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to get that. And they might say, well, gosh, savings rates right now are basically nothing. The stock market is going totally crazy.
Yeah.
And so they might say a combination of things like that, that would give you some insight about that topic. Because if someone were to say that, for instance, and you can frame your proposition in terms of, well, here's a way you could get in a very secure, collateralized return at 4, 5, 6%, whatever you ultimately would propose, but that might be twice what the current savings rates are and way more stable than the stock market or something like that. Okay. And so yet another thing then would be the topic of income. So the reason I think income could be interesting in this case is that I don't have kids in college. I don't have kids at all. But as I recall, tuition is not necessarily like a one-time check you write and then you're done, right? You're probably feeding the university, feeding the housing, feeding your kid on a monthly basis, right? So it could be useful maybe to her to not have one ginormous lump sum that she has to parse and ration out. What if she got a consistent stream of income from you that would sort of match her outgoing, obligations for the tuition, right? And she'd get a down payment as well. So maybe she gets some money as a down payment that contributes towards that. But then also, then she's receiving new money from you each month, which really could be framed to fit in with her objective for funding college.
Definitely. Yeah. So is that something that I should try to kind of probe about, of like how much that tuition would be, or is that maybe something that should be saved for a little bit later once that relationship has kind of been established a little bit and we've kind of gone forward a little bit with those negotiations?
I think so. I mean, I'd love to know the answer to that question now, but I just think pulling that off without it being really awkward could be challenging, right?
Yeah, definitely.
If I was face to face with her, I might drop a couple comments here or there that would sort of like open a door for her to answer the question, but without asking directly. You might say something like, geez, Stanford, I can't imagine what that costs per month each year, or, per month now.
Right.
Sort of be quiet and then see if they fill the space with like, yeah, it's $8,000 a month or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's what I probably would do if I had the chance to be face to face with her. But yeah, I mean, secondhand via John, you've just got to know them. It might be a little early to, to ask that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, okay. But otherwise, from the information they've given you, the flyers, the stuff he sent you, anything he said, they haven't necessarily come right out to you and said, we want to do seller financing right there.
No. I don't know if that's on their radar at all. That's just something that I'm mulling around and think that this fits kind of what, a seller financing deal might fit into.
Yeah.
Just the other pieces, if they agree with that. And so kind of try to navigate those waters a little bit and see if we can steer them towards that dock.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like right now your next steps are, because this is the way that we do it, is it's always sort of like a staged phased thing, right? You're not going to get a deal inked, like right now. And that's okay. Cause it's like steps towards that and steps towards developing a relationship.
Yeah.
So I'd say, really nailing down your market data for what are some other values that you can find for properties of this type, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing too formal. I wouldn't suggest like an appraisal or anything like that, but just finding some other things. And you also might say, well, if I wanted to just go to the market right now and buy a duplex that was already listed, like what would that cost? Just so you have those frames of reference.
Yeah.
I would definitely start firming up what the rents should be, you think, for the 2-bedroom and the 1-bedroom. Mm-hmm. And, given their condition, given their precise location, just seeing how much other inventory there is in those categories right now. If someone was looking for a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, is the market flooded with those right now? Mm-hmm. So I would definitely be doing those things, and I would definitely be trying to find a way to get back in front of John and just spend some more time with him face to face as much as possible. Okay. And if you can't do it face to face, then phone would be the next best thing, but it's by comparison to face is like drastically inferior.
Okay.
But it's better than nothing as well.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah. And another question I had, so something you had kind of mentioned a little bit before was so because like I had mentioned, the basement has some repairs that need to be done. And so my question was, okay, well, should I come in with an offer and say, I'll go closer to what your asking price is, if, we can do seller financing because of the repairs that need to be done on the basement. And something you suggested, it was like maybe make an offer first and then come in afterward. And so I was kind of just wondering to you what that looked like exactly.
Yeah. Great question. So now that you're starting to get an idea of what you think is actually a reasonable price for the place, and you're starting to get a sense for maybe kind of what she might find acceptable from a price perspective, you've been through the property yourself, but nobody's expecting you to be the world's most expert contractor, right? You haven't positioned yourself as that or anything like that, right? So what they're expecting of you is that you have a set of eyes, you've looked around, and you've used common sense. You're like, well, yeah, this could definitely use some spiffing up, right? Mm-hmm. So when you make a proposal to them, it needs to reflect everything that they feel you should already know, right? As a more or less a lay person, but what would they reasonably expect you to know? Well, they would expect you to see it needs interior paint. So it's going to be very difficult to bring that up later and say, it really needs paint. This is going to cost me a couple $1,000 more. Can we renegotiate? That's not going to fly very well because you should have known that, from their perspective. Yeah. But there's a whole category of stuff that you, as a lay person and not a contractor and not, crawling around in the crawl space and up in the attic and stuff, you're not going to know those things until you conduct proper due diligence later.
Okay.
So all that said is I think the strategy would be, and I mean, this is what I do for the most part, is I try to figure out like where do I think is the intersection of what they would find generally reasonable, what I would find generally reasonable, but know that as I actually conduct proper due diligence, as I get in there with an inspector, as I get in there with a contractor, there very well may be things that come up that nobody knew about.
Okay.
This is what's kind of interesting about John too, is that, he's been managing the place for a while, but it would be interesting to see if you could figure out from him, like, to what degree did he do stuff at that property? Like, has he been crawling around in the crawl space? Has he been repairing plumbing? Or has he been more like, I needed to, touch up the paint on this one wall, and I called the carpet cleaner to come out? If that's all he did, then he too might not really have any idea what's going on in the less obvious places. But so do you know anything about him and his role, like the degree of his role?
Yeah, no, I think that he's done quite a bit. I don't know necessarily if it was him that did it himself or if he just conducted it, but he's mentioned quite a few things in the property that he, at the very least, oversaw, such as the entire renovation of the upstairs. And with the garage shed thing, there's a tree that was growing into it and causing a lot of problems, so they had to cut that down. So they did a lot of work with that too. And so from what I can tell, he's been pretty involved with the property and hands-on with it.
Yeah. Okay. And have you also, just about John, have you picked up any vibe from him? Does he find this whole process of like representing the seller and she said no to this other offer? I mean, is he rolling his eyes going, oh my gosh, this is getting really old and tiresome? Or is he's game, playing along, doesn't seem to bother him?
I think a little bit of both. I think that he definitely has a fondness for her, but in his own words, she's a character. And he actually said that a couple of times in our meeting. And so it kind of tells me a little bit that, he's just the sweetest guy and, seems like he does have a really soft spot for her and she does for him too. But, he's kind of just going with the motions a little bit just because, she wants her thing. And so he's just trying to kind of fill that role a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so, if something that's really interesting about three people form a triangle, right? Mm-hmm. And there's lots of different configurations of the points on a triangle. And we would never play, you and him against her, but there is definitely a way for you to kind of go to him and say, you mentioned that she's a character. I want to make a proposal here that's going to be as on target for her as possible. Like, do you have any pointers? Obviously it has to be doable for me. I know you guys don't want to be chasing your tails yet again on another offer. So I want to come up with something to propose here that I really think is going to win for everybody. Like, do you have any insights any pointers for me on how to, like, what's going to work for her, what's not going to work for her? And if you ask something like that, it's sort of like putting you and him on the same team, because then it's like you and he have the same goal, which is to create something that she's going to say yes to, so that you can buy the property and he can stop worrying about it. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of that kind of dynamic, I think, there too. Mm-hmm. But if he used a term like character, to me, like, that's a great open door, because that's a very, I don't know, it's like a powerful word, but a very open-ended word. And I think it'd be super easy to go back and say, I can't stop thinking about you saying that she's a character. And like, but my mind goes a million different ways when I think about what a character is. Like, what did you mean by that? Like, you mean like she wears crazy clothes? Do you mean she's like eccentric, or like how is she a character?
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. That would help me get some insight to her probably. And no, I like that. You're giving me a great list to write down so I can possibly go talk to him. And I'm really excited to kind of bring these things up with him. Okay.
All right, cool. So back to your question then about the offer, the repairs, all of that kind of stuff, and like what order do those things come in? I would say that like the general real estate market, the whole idea is kind of like figure out what things are going to cost to repair, make an offer. If they say no, too bad, move on. And that's just not really how I do it. I want to make a reasonable offer that I know I could live with out of the gate. I don't want to be proposing something that's not authentic to something I would want to follow through with. But I also know that the truth is, throughout the due diligence process, I'm going to find new things. New things are going to come up that I didn't necessarily know about. And there's an opportunity to talk to John and the seller about those things as they come up. Now, that's where I go back to that whole idea of like, you can't say things or you can't bring up things that you should have known, before. But if you get there with your contractor, and he's crawling around below and saying like, I see mold everywhere, like that's definitely a real issue. Or I've got a deal in contract right now where there's a sewer line problem. The sewer line's on a weird party line with the neighbor. And frankly, I was glad to find that because it just gave me something to talk about and to kind of work with to just fine tune the agreement we already had.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what I think. If you can come up with something that is already going to be reasonably palatable to them, I think though the chances are you might be able to fine tune and make it even a little bit better for yourself throughout the due diligence period. And let me just give you like two quick reasons why I think that's really important. One is like right now you have a relationship with John that's like 2 weeks old. I mean, a couple of weeks old.
Less than a week. Yeah.
Less than a week old. Okay. So let's say you get it in contract in a couple of weeks. The escrow period's 2 months. At that point, you literally have known John like 7 times as long as you've known him now.
Right.
So when you've got something that you want to propose to somebody, like 7 times the relationship is probably going to put you in a better spot to get that approved than it would right now, where you're still like a relative stranger, And then the other thing that really goes along with that for John and for the seller is that, when people sign like an agreement to sell something, in their minds, they think they've already sold it. And actually people will literally use those words. They'll go tell their neighbor, oh yeah, I already sold that duplex.
Right.
They didn't sell the duplex. They signed an agreement to sell the duplex, but it's not closed. They don't have any money in their account. The title hasn't transferred, nothing like that. But that psychological shift of they were trying to sell it to, they feel like they've sold it is a big deal. And if, you get 2 months into your escrow period and your due diligence or whatever, maybe it's not that long, but you get deeper into it, they're getting closer and closer and closer to the finish line that they have in their mind. People tend to be more amenable to, to wanting to work with you if they're like an inch from getting things closed and they don't want that to slip away. They don't want to start over yet again. School's getting closer, the tuition bill needs to be paid sooner and sooner and sooner.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes you have like a little bit more polite leverage at that point than you do, right now.
Right. So are you kind of suggesting that once I put an offer in place, after that is when I suggest the seller financing after I already have an offer there?
Well, okay. So probably not. I mean, what you just described is possible because you could make an offer that was structured without seller financing with the knowledge that then you would go back later and say, oh, I found some stuff. I think this is only going to work with seller financing. That's a fairly jarring adjustment though. I mean, unless you really came across some stuff that you're like, whoa, I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
But man, this is going to take $60,000 to renovate this place instead of $6,000, right? If something really major came up, that would probably justify that. But I personally, I would draw the line there and say that doing that intentionally is probably crossing the line of game playing, and we don't want to play games necessarily. We want to be smart and articulate and thoughtful and strategic, right? But we don't want to be jerking people around necessarily. So I think probably if your sincere desire is to do this with some form of seller financing, that your first proposal probably should be reflecting that one way or the other.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so as far as what you were kind of saying with like a down payment, how often do you see where people are more open to a smaller down payment with seller financing, because that is definitely, something that a lot of people would want.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wondering what your experience with that is.
Yeah. So there's a few factors with that. I mean, I'd say two of the biggest ones are number one, is there any existing debt on the property that, most simply would be cashed out upon your purchase, right? So if she still owes $200,000 on this property, which is possible, she's owned it for a long time. She didn't, what did she pay? 95,000 or something like that for it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
95.
But she could have refinanced it 2 months ago for all you know, and pulled a whole bunch of cash out. So it is possible that she could have a higher balance like that. But let's say she's got a mortgage balance of $20,000 left on this property. While there are certainly ways to accommodate that without necessarily paying it off, the simplest thing is just if your down payment was bigger than her owed amount of money, I would pay that off, and that would make that possible. So that's one thing that dictates your down payment. But the other thing, though, probably more practically in this point is, or in this situation, is that she probably needs some cash just to do what she's trying to do, right? She might want a lump sum at the beginning of some sort to, seed the tuition money or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And then if both of those things are going on, like what if there's 20,000 left to pay off and she needs 30,000 at closing to do what she's going to do, then that suggests it's really going to take 50. So again, I think we don't want to make assumptions about what's going to work for her, but there is definitely some savvy that then has to come into trying to tease out some of these insights so that know what to propose. Because it's going to, like, on the one hand, it looks a little tone deaf and naive to propose $20,000 down and then find out she's still got a balance of $200,000. It's sort of like, well, I should have asked better questions and known that.
Right.
On the other hand, you don't want to propose $50,000 down when she would have said yes to 10, right? So there's kind of a dance there of trying to get more insight from them about like what would work in that type of a scenario.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to ask.
Yeah. And you could ask him.
Mm-hmm.
You might say something kind of innocuous like, geez, she's on it for a long time. She's probably got this place paid off about now, right?
Yeah.
And again, just a quiet, let him fill the space and say like, oh yeah, well, her family's rich. She bought it with cash in the first place. Well, that says a lot too. And now that's probably not, an obstacle then.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I kind of, it's funny. I always feel like whenever I'm talking to somebody in a situation, like I'm kind of long-winded and I'll talk for an hour, but at the end of the day, the answer is almost always some variation on, it would be good if we had more information. You know what I mean? Because like you can't have too much information about the seller. Yeah. It's like impossible, right? Mm-hmm. I don't, there's definitely a ceiling of like information we need about this place. And, I'm not caring right now about like what type of siding it has necessarily and what the type of insulation is and all that kind of stuff. But I want to know everything I possibly can about the seller, mm-hmm. because as I recently came up with this little expression, like we have to put the relationship in contract before we can put the deal in contract, really.
Yeah.
We have to know who we're dealing with. And ultimately your job is to put a proposal in front of this person that is going to just nail exactly everything that they want and is going to work for you, but you don't want to be out there blabbing about like what you want necessarily. Our job is to frame something in the context of what works for them. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, it's like you're a tailor, right? If you were a tailor, you wouldn't stand 10 feet away with like, a rough measuring stick and be like, oh, they're about 6 feet tall. No, you'd be down to like the quarter of an inch,
right?
Measuring every little thing. You'd want to know every like little seam, because the better you know all those, like the better the thing that you're sewing is going to fit.
Yes.
And that's what you're doing here too. But so many people normally in real estate, they just kind of walk up and be like, oh, it's about 5'7", looks like about 35-inch waist, and they call it good. Yeah. What we're trying to do is really, really measure so that we can really, really offer a tailored proposal.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Lots of good things to do.
Yeah. So I feel like you've got a lot of homework when it's mostly kind of like people reconnaissance. It's a little bit of like, market research too on the actual duplex and its rents and prices and stuff. But it's more and more people insights, I would say.
It's exciting though. Yeah, it's better than just kind of, in a standstill and like, oh, I don't know what to do next. So yeah, you've given me a lot of homework, but I'm really excited about it. So
good. Yeah. And I can see you being really good at this too. And just know that as long as you're doing it with a sincere heart and a sincere intent, and like you actually want to buy something, you actually want to give her what she wants, you actually want to scratch John's itch of whatever that might be, moving on to some other projects and getting this thing off his plate or whatever. Don't be ashamed of the fact that you're getting good at the people relations, the seller relations, as I would call it, the seller relations game of getting to know people and taking those measurements. That's something to be proud of, I would say. I mean, is that something that somebody could spin into like manipulation and evil? Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's not the context we're doing it in. We know what our real intent is. And so, yeah, I'd say take pride in continuing to develop those.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's something that I really like about, everything that you've taught and stuff, is just because sometimes I find myself getting in my head of like, okay, I have to, find a place. And what if they don't, like what I have to propose or anything? And always the thought that kind of keeps me, grounded and calmed down is I'm actually out there to help people and to, give them what they want. So if I know that, then there's no reason for me to have anxiety. And if it doesn't work, I'll just move on. So yeah, it helps me a lot in that regard. So
yeah. And you'll just log more and more minutes and hours doing this and stuff, and it will get more natural, and you'll start to have more and more instincts about like, boy, it sure would be nice to know this about them before I go making a proposal that involves that type of topic.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, it's great practice.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Awesome. Cool. Well, any other questions at this point?
Not at this point. I'm sure I'll have more at some point, but right now I can't think of any.
Okay. Awesome. Well, keep me posted on how it goes and what the next steps are. And most importantly, what you learn about all the players in the next round of, getting to know everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I will. I'm really excited to find all that out. So we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking, Jeff. It was great talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So there you have it. My live coaching session with Abby on her duplex deal, her desire to purchase this off market, working with a seller on the other side of the world, pursuing seller financing, which hasn't even been stated by the seller as a possibility, but we know as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs that those possibilities are always there if we ask the right questions and really understand the seller's needs. I hope you got a ton out of listening to that live coaching session. I actually got a ton out of conducting it myself. Thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. Again, please do yourself a favor, do us a favor, hit the subscribe button right now in that podcast app. That way you'll know the second the next show is released, and it really helps iTunes know that other people are listening to the show. Reminder, show notes for today's episode are at thoughtfulre.com/E31. And until next time, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off. Hey there, fellow thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that we are in times right now that give new meaning to the word unprecedented, but it also creates incredible opportunity for those of us who do business ethically like we do as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. I recorded a special training video that I'd like for you to go watch. Go to sellerrelationsmastery.com/free, because in this video, I explain to you why this is the absolute perfect storm of ethical opportunity for people who do business the way we do. And because the times that we find ourselves in are unprecedented, that calls for unprecedented actions and decisions and offers in other ways. And so I was inspired by what I saw other leaders doing, and I've decided to offer you my signature real estate entrepreneurship course, a 6-module video course with worksheets as well
for absolutely free for a limited time. Because right now, you've probably got some extra time on your hands. You might have some extra concerns about money, and you need some strategies to shore that situation up. You might be wanting to take this time and invest it in your own self-development, and I want to support that because the world needs right now and in the very near future our talents as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs more than they ever have. So go to sellerrelationsmastery.com/free right now. Watch the training video. Download this idea from me about why right now is the time when you are called to serve and the time that you have to create even more stability in your own life and in your own family. On that page, you can sign up for the free course. Don't miss this opportunity, and I can't wait to see you inside. Now on to the episode.
Thanks for listening to Sleaze Free Real Estate Investing. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.